To call it what you see there, the sovereign passport. Hopefully that gives you an idea of what it really is about. It's not in somebody else's hand. My identity stays in my hands, and it's really owned and controlled by me. It's secure, it's under my control, and it works everywhere, not only in government situations, as we will see. It's about stewardship and trust, not about surveillance. And we know that from a government perspective, if we look at the direction they're going in, and like Diane explained to us last week, or 2 weeks ago, that if we go the direction of China, it really is all about surveillance and control from a government perspective. And we need to look at something that can give us absolutely the opposite, but built on stewardship and trust. So the power of our identity should belong with us, not with institutions. That's the underlying principle. And just to reiterate, the problem with current identity systems, and also the one that is proposed by our government, is firstly, it's centralized. It's a central database, and that is a honeypot. Just from a security perspective, the risk is one breach exposes data of all citizens. So it would be a huge target for criminals. And then secondly, you have little control over how your information is used. Once you hand over your data, you lose all say in whether it's reused, sold, or combined. And even in the current draft framework, they promise us that no commercial institutions will get access to that data. We have to see if they can hold true to their promise. Number 3, people without formal documents, like the unbanked, the undocumented, rural, and even if we look at refugees, all of those are simply locked out. So we need to look for a solution where they can be incorporated if they are trustworthy and can act in good faith and be good actors in the community. Number 4, every new service means re-registering and resharing the same sensitive data. I think we're all familiar with FICA and RICA for the banks and for the cell phone companies. And every time you need to join a platform, there's a whole KYC thing you have to go through. It's time consuming, but it also means your personal data gets stored in many, many, many platforms. And that is really an issue from a privacy perspective. I think all of us can attest to that. So what is the sovereign passport as we envision it? It really is about, it is digital, and in that sense, it's similar to what government proposes, but the difference is it lives on your device. It doesn't live or connect to another company or to government. You create it, you control it, and you decide what to share and with whom. And the same passport works across multiple institutions, churches, businesses, networks, community groups, without any central authority approving you each time. In today's world, each organization holds its own copy of you, the cell phone companies, the banks. But this sovereign passport will give you a single identity, many contexts, able to use it in many places, and it's always under your control. So for me, personally, it sounds like a very good alternative if we can have something like this. If we look at the digital credential life cycle, how we envisioned it, the different stages is it's issued, and it's issued once. Once it's on your device or where you choose to store it, you can give it for somebody else in custody, but that's your choice. Then it's stored. stored on your device, or like I said, in somebody else's platform, if you choose to do that, if you can trust that platform, but it's only stored in one place and then used everywhere, used many times. So simple, but the technical and technically this is all achievable, but that matters less than the pattern. The pattern is there's a trusted issuer, and the question could be, who's that trusted issuer? Well, it's somebody that generally has got a reputation that it can be trusted. I mean, in the internet world, we're familiar with the security certificates that can be issued that say this website is a trusted website. And there's those authorities that have proven over time that they can be trusted as an issuer. We can have the same. And the point here is our government is not necessarily a trusted issuer, like we've seen in the past 30 years with Home Affairs. I mean, they couldn't be trusted with our ID system. So we need to find and identify who are those trusted issuers. It could be a private company that does it for a business. And today there are even government outsources some of it, if they talk about KYC, or the banks outsource it to different companies or institutions that can be trusted. But the point is, once it's trusted, it's under my personal custody, or who I choose to give custody. And then the third thing, when it's used, it's minimal disclosure. So I can choose what information I want to share, and I never overshare. And we've got an example, like, for instance, if you have to prove that you're an adult. Let's walk through that example and see how it will work. So step one, your verified date of birth is stored in your passport, because once that initial credential has been issued to store on your passport, it contains all the information, your date of birth, your place of birth, your maybe even a photo of you, and so forth. Everything in there is stored, but it's stored securely and only you have access to it. So next thing, how do I prove I'm 18? Your device computes. So it's a mathematical, cryptographic, what's called a zero knowledge proof. In the technical world, they call it the ZKP. So this is a standard way that says there's a cryptographic a proof that's encrypted, and only another machine can read it if it's got the right keys. But it's a mathematical statement that says what you've asked is true. So based on the information that says this is my date of birth, the calculation is made, I am over 18, because the question was asked, are you over 18? And then the software says, here's the proof, the mathematical proof that this person is over 18, without disclosing anything else, not your birth date, not your age, because that isn't what the question was asked. The question was, are you over 18? And the answer is yes, but that's cryptographically proven at the software level. Step number 4, the other party then verifies it cryptographically and grants you the necessary access, whether it's going into a venue that you need to be over 18, or whether it's accessing a website that only over 18s can access, or whether it's doing a transaction that you need to be over 18, for instance. So, and because all of this works on open standards, those standards already exist. It's the two platforms says, if we work on the same standard and we can understand the cryptographic encryption, we trust each other. So the trust is not in a person, it's in a platform. But the platform works on open standards, all the platforms work together in the same fashion. So you'll see here at the bottom, there's a statement about the current SA government digital ID draft framework. The problem with it, one of the problems that's been raised is it has no attribute filtering. So with that, according to that framework and the system they are busy building, if you have to prove you're over 18, you have to hand over your entire identity record, ID number and birth date included, because there's no mechanism to release just one attribute. And this is not a minor gap. It's structural and is precisely what the sovereign passport's selective disclosure is built to solve. Now we can say, well, government can change this if enough of us raise our voices, but we still will never have any control of if they decide to change it again. The rules is dictated by government, and that's the point here. We want a system where the rules is dictated by us, the citizens. And you can never really trust the government to do what they said they set out to do, but we know the end result is always much different. So just to confirm what's revealed and what is hidden in that scenario, using the sovereign passport, the verifier just sees you are over 18. There's a proof that it is mathematically valid and that the credential was issued by a trusted authority. Those three things is revealed, nothing else. The rest of your personal information all stays hidden. So the key benefits, we quickly just go over it. There's complete ownership. Your identity belongs to you, not a government or a corporation. There's strong privacy using this zero knowledge proof to prove things without exposing sensitive data. It works everywhere. One profile unlocks many communities and partner services. It's inclusive by design. It works even without traditional government documents, so no one is left out. And it's portable and future-proof. Your identity travels with you across platforms and over time, never trapped in one provider. So these 5 map directly onto the problems from what we stated in the first slide. Just to contrast again, sovereign digital credentials versus government digital ID. It's all about ownership. Either I own it or the state own it. It's about the architecture. One is decentralized versus a single central database. The scope, you've got access to many more communities and platforms versus the other one is mainly to access government services. Participation is voluntary, and the government one, although they say now it's voluntary, we know it will eventually become mandatory. Regarding the risk, there's no single point of failure in the sovereign digital identity, but there is a single point of failure in a government digital ID system. The purpose, our proposed passport is built for local value circulation, and the government one is built for control, not necessarily to uplift communities and give communities flexibility. The government ID has legitimate users, but control sits in their hands, not ours, which is our biggest problem with it. So why this matter in South Africa? We know the draft framework has been published, and yes, it can genuinely improve access to services, but it also concentrates enormous power and personal data in the hands of the state, creating both a security risk and a control risk. As opposed to the sovereign passport that will give people ownership and privacy over their data, communities that can build their own trusted systems, and local economic activity can be supported and protected. No one is forced to surrender all their data just to participate. We should not be forced, but given a choice, as the technology is available to provide a workable alternative. Just looking at maybe how can this system be protected from bad actors? We've got protocol rules that will automatically reject any invalid actions. It's built into the underlying software. We've got zero knowledge proofs to ensure that only what's necessary is ever proven. We can add community governance to let local groups set their own standards, because every community's needs is different. Some communities don't need to know your ID number, but they need to know at least your photo, a photo of your face and where you live, to make sure you can be included in that area community, for instance, if it's geographically based. So that community can set up their own governance system, their own rules, but use the sovereign passport to achieve that. Then you can build in or leverage the reputation systems to reward good behavior and penalize abuse with this. The more you use your digital or the passport to access systems and you act in good faith, that is a record that can be built, and you, on your own passport, it can accumulate your reputation and increase your reputation. So you can have a reputation score, but it's very much the opposite to what's happening in China, where the government determines your reputation score. In this case, the communities you participate in can issue reputation scores based on their rules, and you can build up your private reputation without government dictating or controlling or chucking you out because they don't think you've got a good reputation. You can have oversight and appeals to give fair process. If you govern this entire thing from a community perspective, you have citizen governance built in. And then economic incentives can be built in as well. So the underlying platform, you can have communities that says, for you to be able to participate in this community, you have to put a stake in the community, and it could be monetary, it could be anything else, but you then stand to lose your stake if you act in bad faith. So all of these things are possible in this, but the bottom line is, it doesn't mean that because we go decentralized, it doesn't mean we are lawless, because trust and accountability are engineered in. It's not just controlled by a single gatekeeper. Yeah, maybe some scenarios that would give you a better view of how it can be useful. If we look at the first one, a farmer can prove they are a verified supplier and reach better markets without a middleman taking a cut. So again, coming to that reputation, the more you transact with that identity, the more reputation you get that you are a good supplier. A church or a community group can verify members privately for events or support programs without building a risky database. Third one, young people with no formal documents can still build reputation and unlock opportunities. And fourthly, value created locally stays locally, redistributed fairly through community rules rather than leaking away. I'm sure you can picture yourself or know somebody in each of these stories. So, to just conclude, the sovereign passport puts power back where it belongs, in the people's hands. You can reclaim your identity, build stronger communities, and shape a fairer future. What do you guys think? Could it be a viable alternative that we should pursue?